Hi everyone, I hope you are all okay and having a wonderful day. Today I'm going to carry on reading some of Six of Crows for you. We've only got a couple of chapters left, so let's get started. We are on chapter 35, Matthias. 11 bells. She's beautiful, Brum said, in an exaggerated way. You were so strong not to be lured by her. I was lured, though, thought Matthias. And it wasn't just her beauty. The alarm, Matthias said. Her compatriots, no doubt. But Matthias, my men will take care of it. The ice court is secure. He glanced back at Nina's cell. We could press the button right now. Won't she be a threat? We've combined the duraparem with a sedative that makes them more biddable. We're still working out the correct ratios, but we'll get there. Besides, by the second dose, the addiction does the work of controlling them. Not the first dose. Depends on the Grisha. How many times have you done this? Brum laughed. I haven't counted. But trust me, she'll be so desperate for more duraparadem that she won't dare act out. It's a remarkable transformation. I think you'll enjoy it. Matthias's stomach clenched. You've kept this scientist alive, then? He's done his best to replicate the process of creating the drug, but it's a complicated thing. Some batches work, others are no better than dust. As long as he can be of service, he lives. Brum placed his hand on Mattis's shoulder, his harsh gaze softening. I can scarcely believe you're really here, alive, standing before me. I thought you were dead. I believe the same as you. When I saw you in that ballroom, I barely recognized you, even in that uniform. You are so changed. I had to let the witch tailor me. Brem's revulsion was obvious. You allowed her to. Somehow, seeing that response in someone else made Matthias ashamed of the way he'd reacted to Nina. It had to be done, he said. I needed her to believe I was committed to her cause. That's all over now, Matthias. You are finally safe and among your own kind. Brum frowned. Something is troubling you. Matthias looked into the cell next to Nina's, then another and another. Moving down the hall as Brum followed, some of the captive geisha were agitated, pacing. Others had their faces pressed up against the glass. Others simply lay on the floor. You can't have known about Parem for more than a month. How long has this facility been here? I had it built almost 15 years ago, with the blessing of the king and his council. Matthias drew up short. 15 years? Why? We needed somewhere to put the Grisha after the trials. After? When Grisha are found guilty, they're sentenced to death. Brum shrugged. It's still a death sentence, just one a little longer in the making. We discovered long ago that the Grisha could prove a useful resource. A resource. You told me they were to be eradicated, that they were a blight on the natural world. And they are, when they attempt to masquerade as men. They aren't capable of right thinking or of human morality. They aren't meant to be controlled. That's why you wanted Parem? Matthias asked incredulously. We have tried our own methods for years with limited success. But you've seen what Jurda Parem can do, what Grisha can do when it's in its grip. A gun is not evil, nor is a blade. Jurda Parem ensures obedience. It makes Grisha what they were always meant to be. A second army, Matthias asked, his voice thick with scorn. An army is made of soldiers. These creatures were born to be weapons. They were born to serve the soldiers of the jail. Brum squeezed his shoulder. Ah, Matthias, how I've missed you. Your faith was always so pure. I'm glad you're reluctant to embrace this measure, but this is our chance to strike a death blow. Do you know why Grisha are so hard to kill? Because they're not of this world, that they are very good at killing each other. They call it like calls to like. Wait until you see what all we've achieved, the weapons their fabricators have helped us develop. Matthias looked back down the hall. Nina Zenik spent a year in Kerch trying to bargain for my freedom. I'm not sure those are the actions of a monster. Can a viper lie still before it strikes? Can a wild dog lick your hand before it snaps at your neck? A Grisha may be capable of kindness, but that does not change her fundamental nature. Matthias considered this. He thought of Nina standing terrified in that cell as the door slammed shut. He had longed to see her made captive, punished as she had been punished. And yet, after everything they'd been through, he was not surprised by the pain he felt at seeing it come to pass. What is the shoe scientist like? He asked Bram, stubborn, still grieving his father. Matthias knew nothing of Yul Bela's father, but there was a more important question to ask. Is he secure? The treasury is the safest place on the island. You keep him here with the Grisha? Brum nodded. The main vault was converted into a laboratory for him. And you're sure it's safe? I have the master key, said Brum, patting the disc hanging from his neck, and he guarded night and day. Only a select few even knows he's here. It's late, and I need to make sure the Black Protocol has been addressed, but if you like, I'll take you to see him tomorrow. Brum placed his arm around Matthias, and tomorrow we'll deal with your return and reinstatement. I still stand accused of slave trading. We'll get that girl to sign a statement recanting the slaving charges easily enough. Believe me, once she's had her first taste of Jura Perem, she'll do anything you ask and more. There will be a hearing, but I swear you will wear Driscoll colours again, Matthias. Driscoll colours. Matthias had worn them with such pride, and the things he'd felt for Nina had caused him so much shame. It was still with him. Maybe it always would be. He'd spent too many years full of hate for it to vanish overnight. But now the shame was an echo, and all he felt was regret. For the time he'd wasted, for the pain he'd caused, and yes, even now, for what he was about to do. He turned to Brum, this man who had become a father and mentor to him. When he'd lost his family, it had been Brum who had recruited him for the Driscoll. Matthias had been young, angry, completely unskilled, but he'd given what was left of his broken heart to the cause. A false cause, a lie. When had he seen it? When he'd helped Nina bury her friend? When he'd fought by her side? Or had it been long before, when she'd slept in his arms that first night on the ice? When she'd saved him from the shipwreck? Nina had wronged him, but she'd done it to protect her people. She'd hurt him, but she'd attempted everything in her power to make things right. She'd shown him in 1,000 ways that she was honourable and strong and generous and very human, maybe more vividly human than anyone he'd ever known. And if she was, then Grisha weren't inherently evil. They were like anyone else, full of the potential to do great good and also great harm. To ignore that would make Matthias the monster. You taught me so much, Matthias said. You taught me to value honour and strength. You gave me the tools for vengeance when I needed them most. And with those tools, we will build a great future, Matthias. For Jura's time has come. Matthias returned his mentor's embrace. I don't know if you're wrong about the Grisha, he said gently. I just know you're wrong about her. He held Brum tight, in a hold Matthias had learned in the echoing chaining rooms of the Driscoll stronghold rooms he would never see again. He held Brum as he struggled briefly, and his body went slack. When Matthias pulled away, Brum had slipped into unconsciousness. But Matthias did not think he'd managed the rage that lingered on his mentor's features. He made himself memorize it. It was right that he should remember that look. He was a true traitor at last, and he should carry the burden of it. When they entered the great ballroom, Matthias and Kaz had staked out a shadowy nook near the stairs. They'd watched Nina enter in that outrageous gown of shimmering scales, and then Matthias had spotted Brum. The shock of seeing his mentor alive had been followed by the terrible realization that Brum was following Nina. Brum knows, he said to Kaz. We have to help her. Be smart, Helva. You can save her and get us Yul Bela, too. Matthias had nodded and plunged into the crowd. Decency, he heard Kaz mutter behind him. Like a cheap cologne. He waylaid Brum by the stairs. Sir? Not now. Matthias had been forced to step right in front of him. Sir. Brum had halted then. His face had shown anger at being stopped, then confusion, and then wondering disbelief. Matthias? He whispered. Please, sir, Matthias had said hurriedly. Just give me a moment to explain. There is a Grisha here tonight, intent on assassinating one of your prisoners. If you'll bear with me, I can explain the plot and how it can be stopped. Brum had signalled to another Driscoll to watch Nina, and shepherded Matthias into an alcove beneath the stairs. Speak, he said, and Matthias had told him the truth, a bare sliver of it. His escape from the shipwreck, his near drowning, Nina's false charge of slavery, his captivity in Hellgate, and then the promise of pardon. He'd blamed it all on Nina, and said nothing of Kaz or the others. When Brum had asked if Nina was alone in her mission, he simply said he didn't know. She believes I'm waiting to escort her over to the secret bridge. I break away as soon as I could and came to find you. A part of him was disgusted by how easily the lies came to his lips, but he would not leave Nina at Brum's mercy. He looked at Brum now, mouth slightly open in sleep. One of the things he'd respected most in his mentor was his mercilessness, his willingness to do hard things for the sake of the cause. But Brum had taken pleasure in what he'd done to these Grisha, what he would have gladly done to Nina and Jesper. Maybe the hard things had never been difficult for Brum, the way they had been for Matthias. They had not been a sacred duty performed reluctantly for the sake of the Fajr. They had been a joy. Matthias slipped the master key from around Brum's neck and dragged him into an empty cell. Propping him up against the wall in a seated position, Matthias hated to leave him there. Chin flopped on his chest, legs sprawled in front of him, without dignity. He hated the thought of the shame that would come to him. A warrior betrayed by someone to whom he'd given his trust and affection. He knew that pain well. Matthias pressed his forehead once, briefly, against Brum's. He knew his mentor could not hear him, but he spoke the words anyway. The life you live, the hate you feel, it's poison. I can drink it no longer. Matthias locked the cell door and hurried down the passage towards Nina, towards something more. Chapter 36. Jesper, 11 bells. Jesper waited by the slit in the wall, a sniper's bolt, the perfect place for a boy like him. What did we just do? He wondered. But his blood was alive. His rifle was at his shoulder. The world made sense again. So where were the guards? Jesper had expected them to rush into the courtyard as soon as he and Wyland triggered Black Protocol. I've got it, Wyland called from behind him. Jesper hated to give up the high ground before they knew what they were up against, but they were short on time, and they needed to get to the roof. All right, let's go. They raced down the stairs. As they were about to burst from the gatehouse archway, 6 guards came running into the courtyard. Jesper stopped short and held out his arm. Turn back, he said to Wyland. But Wyland was pointing across the courtyard. Look! The guards weren't moving towards the gatehouse. All their attention was focused on a man in olive drab clothing standing by one of the stone slabs. That uniform. A woman walked through the wall, a figure of shimmering mist that solidified beside the stranger. She wore the same olive drab. Tide makers, Wayland said. The shoe? The guards opened fire and the tide makers vanished, then reappeared behind the soldiers and lifted their arms. The guards screamed and dropped their weapons. A red haze formed around them. The haze grew denser as the guards shrieked, their flesh seeming to shrink against their bones. It's their blood, Jesper said, bile raising in his throat. All saints, the tide makers are draining their blood. They were being squeezed dry. The blood formed floating pools in the vague shapes of men, slick shadows that hovered in the air, the wet red of garnets, then splashed to the ground at the same time as the guards collapsed, flaccid skin hanging from their desiccated bodies in grotesque folds. Back up the stairs, whispered Jesper. We need to get out of here. But it was too late. The female tide-maker disappeared. In the next breath, she was on the stairs. She balanced her weight on the banisters with her hands planted her boots against Wyland's chest, kicking him backwards into Jesper. They tumbled onto the black stone of the courtyard. The rifle was jerked from Jesper's arms and tossed aside with a clatter. He tried to stand, and the tide-maker cuffed him on the back of the head. Then he was lying next to Wyland, as the tide-makers towered above them. They lifted their hands, and Jesper saw the faint redness haze appear over him. He was going to be drained. He felt his strength start to ebb. He looked to the left, but the rifle was too far away. Jesper, Wyland gasped. Metal! Fabricate! Then he started to scream. In a flash, Jesper understood. This was a fight he couldn't win with a gun. There was no time to think, no time to doubt. He ignored the pain tearing over his skin and focused all his attention on the bits of metal clinging to his clothes, the shavings and tiny particles from the severed link in the gate chain. He wasn't a good fabricator, but they didn't expect him to be a fabricator at all. He thrust his hands forward, and the bits of metal flew from his uniform, a gleaming cloud that hung in the air for the briefest second, then shot towards the tide-makers. The female tide-maker screamed as the metal burrowed into her flesh, and she tried to turn the mist. The other tide-maker did the same, features liquefying, but then solidifying once more, his face grey, speckled with bits of metal. Jesper didn't relent. He drove the metal home into their organs, questing deeper. He could feel them attempting to manipulate the particles of metal. If the problem had been a bullet or a blade, they might have succeeded, but the flecks and shavings of steel were too many and too small. The woman clutched her stomach and fell to her knees. The man screamed, coughing up clotted black splats of metal and blood. Help me, the woman sobbed. Her edges blurred, her body vibrating as she struggled to fade to mist. Jesper dropped his hands. He and Wyland scooted away from the withering bodies of the tide-makers. Were they dying? Had he just killed 2 of his kind? Jesper had only wanted to survive. He thought again of the banner on the wall. All those strips of red, blue and purple. Wyland tugged at his arm. His face looked slightly transparent, the veins too close to the surface. Jesper, we have to go. Jesper nodded slowly. Now! Jesper made his feet move, made himself follow Wyland. Scaled the rope to the roof. He felt woozy and light-headed. The others were depending on him. He knew that. He had to keep going. But he felt as if he'd left some part of himself in the courtyard below. Something he hadn't even known mattered, intangible as mist. Excuse me. 37. Nina. 11 bells and quarter chime. When Matthias opened the door to Nina's cell, she hesitated for the briefest moment. She couldn't help it. As long as she lived, she would never forgive Matthias's face at that window. How cruel he'd seemed, or the doubt that had sprung up in her heart. She felt it again, looking at him standing in the doorway. But when he held his hand out to her, she knew they were done with fear. She ran to him, and he swept her up in his arms. He buried his face in her hair. She felt his lips move against her ear, and when he said, I never want to see you like this again. Do you mean the dress or the cell? A laugh shook him. Definitely the cell. Then he cupped her face in his hands. Nina swallowed hard. And then she knew that he was meant to be. I've been made to protect you. Only in death will I be kept from this oath. It was the vow of the Driscoll to Fajer. And now it was Matthias's promise to her. She knew she would say something profound. Something beautiful in response. Instead, she spoke the truth. If we make it out of here alive, I'm going to kiss you unconscious. A grin split his beautiful face. She couldn't wait to see the real of his eyes again. Your Baylor is in the vault, he said. Let's go. As Nina raced down the hall after Matthias, the clanging bells of Black Protocol filled her ears. If Brum had known about her, then the chances were the other Driscoll did too. She doubted it would be long before they came looking for their commander. Please tell me Kaz hasn't gone missing again, she said, as they hurtled down the corridor. I left him in the ballroom. We're to meet him by the ash. Last time I looked, it was surrounded by Driscoll. Maybe Black Protocol will take care of that. If we survive the Driscoll, we won't survive Kaz. Not if we kill Yulbaya. Matthias put up a hand for them to stop before they turned the next corner. They approached slowly. When they rounded it, Nina made quick work of the guard at the vault door. Matthias took his rifle, then Brum's key was in the lock, and the particular entry to the vault was opening. Nina raised her hands, prepared to attack. They waited, hearts pounding as the door slid open. The room was as white as all the others, but hardly bare. Its long tables were full of beakers set over low blue flames, heating and cooling apparatuses, glass vials full of powders in various shades of orange. One wall was devoted to a massive slate board covered in chalk equations. The other was excuse me. The other was all glass cases with little metal doors. They contained blooming Durida plants, and Nina guessed the cases would be heated. A cot was pushed up against the other wall, its thin covers rumpled, papers and notebooks strewn around it. A shoe boy was seated cross-legged on it. He stared at them, his dark hair flopping over his forehead, a notebook in his lap. He couldn't have been more than 15. We aren't here to harm you, Nina said in Shu. Where is Yulbaya? The boy brushed his hair back from his golden eyes. He's dead. Nina frowned. Had Van Eck's information been wrong? Then what is all this? Have you come to kill me? Nina wasn't quite sure of the answer to that. Shishua, she ventured. The boy's face crumpled in relief. You're Kurj? Nina nodded. We came to rescue Yulbaya. The boy pulled his knees to his chest and wrapped his arms round them. He's beyond your rescue. My father died when the Fijerns tried to stop the Kurj from taking out Amrit Jen. His voice faltered. He was killed in the crossfire. My father. Nina translated for Matthias as she tries to take in what this meant. Dead? Matthias asked, and his broad shoulders slumped slightly. Nina knew what he was thinking. All they'd endured, all they'd done, and Yulbaya had been dead the whole time. But the Fijerns had kept his son alive for a reason. They're trying to make you recreate his formula, she said. I helped him in the lab, but I don't remember everything. He bit his lip, and I've been stalling. Whatever Purim the Fijerns had been using on the Grisha must have come from the original stock Yulbaya had been bringing to the Kurj. Can you do it? Nina asked. Can you recreate the formula? The boy hesitated. I think so. Nina and Matthias exchanged a glance. Nina swallowed. She'd killed before. She'd killed tonight, even. But this was different. This boy wasn't pointing a gun at her or trying to harm her. Murdering him, and it would be murder, would also mean betraying Inej, Kaz, Jesper, and Wylan. People who were risking their lives, even now, for a prize they'd never seen. But then she thought of Nesta, failing lifelessly in the snow, of the cells full of Grisha, lost in their own misery. All because of this drug. She raised her arms. I'm sorry, she said. If you succeed, there will be no end to the suffering you unleash. The boy's gaze was steady, his chin jutting up stubbornly, as if he'd known this moment might come. The right thing to do was obvious. Kill this boy quickly, painlessly, destroy the lab and everything in it. Eradicate the secret of Durida Purim. If you wanted to kill a vine, you didn't just need to keep cutting it back. You tore it from the ground, by the roots. and yet her hands were shaking. Wasn't this the way Driscoll thought? Destroy the threat, wipe it out, no matter that person in front of you was innocent. Nina, Matthias said softly, he's just a kid. He's one of us. One of us. A boy not much younger than she was, caught up in a war he hadn't chosen for himself. A survivor. What's your name? She asked. Kue. Kue Yulbo, she began. Did she intend to pass sentence? To apologize? To beg forgiveness? She'd never know. When she found her voice, all she said was, How fast can you destroy this lab? Fast, he replied. He sliced a hand through the air, and the flames from beneath each one of the beakers shot out in a blue arc. Nina stared. You're Grisha. You're an Inferni. Kue nodded. Jurdapuram was a mistake. My father was trying to find a way to help me hide my powers. He was a fabricator, a Grisha, as am I. Nina's mind was reeling. Boyul Bea, a Grisha, hiding in plain sight behind the borders of Shu-Han. There was no time to let it sink in. We need to destroy as much of your work as we can, she said. There are combustibles, replied Kue, already gathered up papers and Jurda samples. I can rig an explosion. Only the vault. There are Grisha here, and guards, and Matthias's mentor. Nina would have gladly let Brum die, but though Matthias had betrayed his commander, she doubted he'd want to see the man who'd become a second father to him blown to bits. Her heart rebelled when she thought of the Grisha she'd be leaving behind, but there was no way to get them to the harbour. Leave the rest, she said to Matthias and Kue. We need to move. Kue arranged a series of vials full of liquid over the burners. I'm ready. They checked the corridor and hurried towards the treasury entrance. At every turn she expected to see Driscoll, or guards, storming their way, but they charged through the halls unimpeded. At the main door, they paused. There's a hedge mage to our left, Nina said. Matthias nodded. We'll use it for cover, then make a run for the ash. As soon as they opened the door, the clamour of bells became almost unbearable. Nina could see the elder clock on the highest silvery spire of the palace, its face glowing like a moon. Bright lights from the guards' towers moved across the white island, and Nina could hear the shouts of soldiers closing in around the palace. She clung to the sides of the building, following Matthias, trying to keep to the shadows. Hurry, Kue said, with a nervous glance back at the lab. This way, Matthias said. The maze! Halt! Someone shouted. Too late. Guards were racing towards them from the direction of the maze. There was nothing to do but run. They bolted past the entrance to the colonnade and into the circular courtyard. There were Driscoll everywhere, in front of them, behind them. Any moment they'd be gunned down. That was when the explosion hit. Nina felt it before she heard it. A wave of heat lifted her off her feet and tossed her into the air, chased by a deafening boom. She came down hard on the white paving stones. Everything was smoke and chaos. Nina struggled to her knees, ears ringing. One side of the treasury had been reduced to rubble, smoke, and dust billowing into the night sky. Matthias already striding towards her with Kue, she pushed herself to her feet. Sten! Cried two guards, breaking off from another group, running in the direction of the treasury. What's your business here? We were just enjoying the party, Nina explained, letting all her real exhaustion and terror fill her voice. And then, it was embarrassingly easy to let the tears flow. He held up his gun. Show me your papers. No papers, Lars. The witch hunter's head snapped up as Matthias stepped forwards. Do I know you? You did once, though I looked a bit different. Hej, Marden, Lars. Helva? He asked. They said you were dead. I was. Lars looked from Matthias to Nina. This is the heart-render Brum brought to the treasury. Then he took in Kue's presence and understanding struck. Traitor, he snarled at Matthias. Nina raised her hand to drop Lars' pulse, but as she did, she caught movement in the shadows to her right. She cried out as something struck her. When she looked down, she saw loops of cable closing over her, binding her upper arms tight to her body. She couldn't raise her hands. She couldn't use her power. Matthias grunted, and Kuei screamed as cables lashed from the darkness, snapping around their torsos, binding their arms. This is what we do, bloodletter, sneered Lars. We hunt filth like you. We know all of your tricks. He kicked Matthias's legs from beneath him. Matthias went to his knees and sucked in a breath. They told us you were dead. We mourned you, burned barrels of ash for you. But now I see they were protecting us from something worse. Matthias Helvar, a traitor, aiding our enemies, consorting with unnaturals. He spat in Matthias' face. How could you betray your country and your god? Jajel is the god of life, not death. And there are others here for Yolbeya besides you and this creature. No, Nina lied. I didn't ask you which, said Lars. It doesn't matter. We'll get the information from you our own way. He turned to Kuei. And you? Don't think there won't be repercussions. He made a signal in the air. From the shadows of the colonnade, a row of men and boys emerged. Driscoll, hoods drawn up over their long golden hair that glinted at their collars, dressed in black and silver, like creatures born from the dark crevices that split the northern ice. They fanned out, surrounding Nina, Matthias, and Kuei. Nina thought of the white prison cells, the drains in the floors. Had all of the Prem been destroyed with Kuei's lab? How long would it take him to make another batch? And what had they subjected her to before that? She cast a desperate look into the darkness, praying for some sign of Kaz. Had someone got to him? Had he just abandoned them there? She was meant to be a warrior. She needed to steel herself against what was to come. One of the Driscoll came forward with what looked like a long-handled whip attached to the cables that bound them, and handed it to Lars. Do you recognise this, Helva? Lars asked. You should. You helped with its design. Retractable cables for controlling multiple captives, and the barbs, of course. Lars flicked his finger over one of the cables, and Nina gasped as stinging little barbs jabbed into her arms and torso. The Driscoll laughed. Leave her be, Matthias growled in Fijian, the words bristling with rage. For the briefest second, she saw a flash of panic in his former compatriots. He was bigger than all of them, and he'd been one of their leaders, one of the best of these murderous boys. Then Lars gave another cable a hard flick. The barbs released, and Matthias let out a pained huff of breath, doubling at the waist, human once more. Lars gave the whip a sharp snap, and the cables contracted, forcing Nina, Matthias, and Kuei to totter after him in an awkward parade. Do you still pray to our god, Helva? Lars asked as they passed the sacred tree. Do you think Jel hears all the mewling of men who give themselves over to the defilement of Grisha? Do you think? Then a sharp, animal yelp sounded. It took Nina and the others a long moment to realise it had come from Lars. He opened his mouth, and blood gushed over his chin and onto the bright silver buttons of his uniform. His hand released the whip, and the hooded Driscoll beside him lunged forward to snatch it up. A sharp pop, pop, pop came from the base of the sacred tree. Nina recognised that sound. She'd heard it on the northern road before they were waylaid, the prison wagon. When they'd brought the tree down, the ash creaked and moaned. Its ancient roots began to curl. Nej! Cried one of the Driscoll. They stood open-mouthed, gaping at the stricken tree. Nej! Another voice wailed. The ash began to tilt. It was too large to be felled by salt concentrate alone, but as it tipped, a dull roar emerged from the gaping black hole beneath it. This was where the Driscoll came to hear the voice of their god, and now he was speaking. This is going to sting a bit, said the Driscoll, holding the whip. His voice was rasping, familiar. His hands were gloved. But if we live, you'll thank me later. His hood slid off, and Kaz Brecker looked back at them. The stunned Druskulls lifted their rifles. "Don't pop the balloon before you hit the bottom," Kaz called. Then he grabbed Kuwait and launched them both into the black mouth beneath the roots of the tree. Nina screamed as her body was yanked forwards by the cables. She scrabbled over the stones trying to find purchase. The last thing she glimpsed was Matthias toppling into the hole beside her. She heard gunfire, and then she was falling into the black, into the cold, into the throat of Gel, into nothing at all. So we will be carrying on with chapter 38 next time I see everyone. So I hope you have a lovely rest of your day, and thank you for listening.